As much as we have noble ideals of democracy and a participatory democracy, too often those empowered rather have decisions made in a closed room with only like-minded people around the table. And somebody's got to be agitating on the outside to make sure that others get a seat at the table, or at least get in the door and make their presence known.
Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
So welcome, friends. I'm Dr. Ike Wilson, and this again is the Civic Brief. Now today we enter perhaps what's going to be the most morally charged, emotionally complex, and civically consequential terrain that, frankly, we've covered on this, our 16th episode of the Civic Brief. More pointedly, we're going to delve into what I'd like to call the intersections and sometimes collisions. We're going to spend a lot of time on those collisions of force and faith in America. Now, across this country, we're seeing something hidden, but honestly, if we're honest with ourselves, something hidden but still very familiar. Clergy stepping between armed officers and unarmed citizens, pastors caught in the crossfire of political wars, faith communities facing pressures to choose sides that their theology does not always authorize, in a nation grappling with compound crises that no single institution, neither church nor state, can manage alone. Now, to begin this journey into the civic, the moral, the theological, and security dimensions of a moment that will shape America's identity certainly for decades to come, we are joined today by an extraordinary guide, Bishop John Stowe, shepherd of the Diocese of Lexington, Kentucky, known nationally for his integrity, his service to the poor, and his insistence that faith must never be weaponized. Bishop John is the third bishop of Lexington, Kentucky, appointed and installed in 2015. He was born in Lorain, Ohio. He entered the conventual Franciscan order after high school, earning degrees in philosophy, history, and a licentiate in sacred theology. He was ordained in 1995, and as such, Bishop Stowe served at historic border parishes in El Paso, Texas. He's ministered to the Yselta del Sur Pueblo, and later held major diocesan leadership roles as moderator of the Curia, vicar general, and chancellor. He's taught extensively in lay ministry and diocesanate programs. He's led interfaith initiatives and chaired peace and justice work within his Franciscan province. He's currently serving also as the bishop president of Pax Christi USA. Now today, we're here to ask and grapple with, frankly, a simple but demanding question. Here's the question. How can faith communities and public institutions together defend the dignity of every human person in an age of increasing polarization and what we call in the Civic Brief compound insecurity? What unites them both, what unites us all both in this conversation, is a refusal to surrender human dignity to the logic of fear, power, and political expediency. Now, today's arc, again, folks, travelers, you're used to me. By now, 16 episodes in, I am cursed with the gift of gab. We're going to try a very aggressive and very robust agenda here, 4 parts. We'll see how far we get in the 4 parts. No problem. But here's what we're going to try to do in terms of our arc of conversation. We're first going to talk a bit about the constitutional and moral ground on which America situates the sacred and the secular, how we intend that intersection between what St. Augustine called this, and John Winthrop, one of our early finders and founders, called the city of man and the city of God, right? A nation born between the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment, and how we've attempted to marry those in a balanced way. We're also going to try to get into what I'll call the on-the-ground collisions of force and faith, federalization of of federal troops and National Guard in places like Chicago, Illinois, Portland, Oregon, and Washington, D.C., so many other places, in the pastoral life and leadership challenges that lie at the nexus of that force and faith collision. Hopefully, we're going to have a little time to talk about some of the compound risk and civic dilemmas emerging across all of our communities in that context. And then last but not least, maybe at least one question we might be able to sneak in to think and endeavor future forward. I'd love to have the bishop give us his thoughts on the future-facing exploration of artificial intelligence, a little bit maybe even on cosmology and the role of faith in the world to come, which is already here with us today. That's a long preamble. Bishop Stowe, can't tell you how excited I am to have you with us today. I'd love to give you the microphone for a bit. Please add to, delete, correct any of what I've put out, and maybe give us a little bit of your own shaping of the conversational environment here, and a little bit on your pastoral life and as a leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Thanks for being with us.
Great. Well, good to be with you, Dr. Wilson. I've enjoyed reading the little that I have of your work and eager to be part of this conversation. You did a fine job with the resume of my life until this point. Okay. And what I would emphasize is my real formation as a priest happened on the U.S.-Mexico border. So I grew up near Cleveland, but I really had a whole new education when I lived right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And we got to see the situation of immigration from a very different perspective when you're right there. Especially people in that part of the country will say, we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Oh, wonderful.
And the historic church that I first pastored when I was there was founded in 1680, was founded by the Tigua tribe, Pueblo Indians, the only Pueblo Indians in Texas driven down at the time of the Pueblo Revolt. Oh, and wow. They, and the mission that they founded is still in existence. Descendants of the original parishioners are still on the rolls there. And that church building has been on both sides of the Rio Grande and in the middle of it at one point. But Amazing. Both sides were Mexico at that time. So it was a little bit different. That rich cultural experience has had a tremendous impact on me. Also with that, and very crucial to my formation, is being involved in community organizing, which really gave life to my role as a pastor and helped me to connect faith to everyday life for the people in a largely impoverished border area.
Right.
Culturally rich, in so many ways, historically and otherwise very rich, but monetarily poor. And yet still in a better situation than what we saw across the Rio Grande in Mexico. So those perspectives really were formational for me. Between the time that I was there in El Paso and being named the Bishop of Lexington, I did spend 5 years in Northwest Ohio at a national shrine, a Marian shrine, a place of pilgrimage. And our largest number of pilgrims that came there were Chaldean Catholics, not very well known, but Chaldeans are from Iraq. And so we had a number of them who had settled in Detroit, Michigan, was only a little more than an hour away from the shrine in Northwest Ohio. And although many ethnic groups came to the shrine, they were the largest number. So that also had an interesting impact. The only branch of the Catholic Church, the only rite in the Catholic Church that celebrates Mass in Aramaic, in the language of Jesus, which they're very proud of. And it's fascinating to work with them as well.
Are they Yazidi peoples?
No, they're not Yazidi. They are Iraqi through and through. They're Arabic people, and but Christian from the very beginning. This is the land of Abraham. This is the land, of our faith.
Bishop, I figured at some point we would learn of more of our own providential, if I might call it, intersections of our lives, our civic engagement lives. And I mean, you've already taught me a lot already, just in your preamble about the Chaldean Catholics, completely unaware, and shamefully to a certain degree, because of the amount of time and years I've spent in the land between two rivers, in Iraq specifically, through my military and humanitarian operations experiences. particularly in my last endeavors there, sadly dealing with the so-called the abomination of the so-called Islamic State, and they're pinpointing on attacks on Christians and Catholics in particular. That's one of the reasons why I raised the question about the Yazidis. A large part of our mission was trying to provide some protective sanctuary for some very heinous things being done pointedly, targetedly to the Yazidis.
Yes.
But wow, to have the Chaldean Catholics here in Ohio.
They lived in Michigan, came to visit the shrine in Ohio. But Detroit is a major center for them. They're also in San Diego and now have a parish in Phoenix as well.
So between your time at the southern border and now and also with your experiences with the Chaldeans, is this what brings you a large center point to your pastoral life, being a focus on pastoring to migrants and immigrants?
That's a very big part of it. And then a whole different dimension. The last 10 years that I've been in Lexington, the Lexington Diocese consists of 50 counties in central and eastern Kentucky, 40 of which are Appalachian. So that's been another culture. Yes. But other people very much marginalized, people that have suffered from the dominance of extractive industries, first timber and then coal, and kind of left behind by the progress that has been made in many other areas. So,
and a little bit of my prep work, I understand this is an anniversary year, particular to a pastoral declaration that was made, I think, back in 1975, relating to environmental issues and poverty in and around Appalachia. Do I have that right?
Exactly. And that letter, which was written by all of the bishops in dioceses that touch on Appalachia, that's 30-some bishops, it was really the introduction to many in the church in the United States to Appalachia.
Yes.
It's really a forgotten land or a place that we often overlook. You know, the coastal East and West communities talk about flyover areas, and then even within those flyover areas, Appalachia, even though it stretches from Maine to Georgia, is not all that well known.
And I find that it's these places, these unfortunately not as well known places inside our own country, where you find the most unfortunate and seminal, there's the word, seminal intersections between all the isms, but joined together in classism. You know, the isms of sexism, racism, but at the intersection of all of that, the common denominator, unfortunately, if you will, environmental degradationism, if I can make up a term, just to kind of stick to the theme of isms, and classism. You know, the issue of have-nots in a structured way, in a structural way that has a tendency and a potentiality of making permanent those at any given moment in the have-nots to become perpetual have-nots, and how that interplays with elements of force. You know, oftentimes we think, and probably our listeners are thinking about force only in military lethal terms, but when I say force, I'm also talking about the force of policy and the deliberate choices that our governments, and by, with, and through us, if those governments are democracies, small d, those choices that we make and what we choose to do and what we choose not to do, particularly when it comes to class issues and wealth gaps in what you will.
Which is precisely why I found community organizing to be so important. Both in the border community and now in an Appalachian community, because, you know, nobody's given a seat at the table. Everybody has had to fight to be able to be there.
Exactly. Yes.
You know, as much as we have noble ideals of democracy and a participatory democracy, too often those in power would rather have decisions made in a closed room, with only like-minded people around the table. And somebody's got to be agitating on the outside to make sure that others get a seat at the table, or at least get in the door and make their presence known. And community organizing, in my experience, also can really complement somebody's faith experience, because, you know, that's the deepest commitment for the people that are organizing. There's a loyalty to the nation. There's a buy-in to the American democratic ideals.
Yes.
But there's a faith that underlies that's even stronger. And when we can put those things together, so as you said earlier, the dignity of the person, to even recognize the worth of the human person. Dignity sounds like almost a philosophical term, but if you think about human beings not knowing their own worth and or having that worth denied by the governmental or economic or whatever conditions in which they live, that's where the gospel should be for Christians, should be liberating, and where all of our faith traditions have something to say about the importance, the mystery that each human being is, the value. And sometimes we denigrate that in society, and the structures don't let that flourish for every community in the same way.
So well put, Bishop John. And as you were laying that out, what immediately comes to my mind is, this quest for identity, discovery and rediscovery. It's a process. Mm-hmm. It's a transitory process. And what immediately came to mind is the struggles of our LGBTQ plus communities, and particularly the trans community in this country today, because their own quest for identity is coming in at a time, and in a time of coincidence and collision with a nation that is once again going through the struggles of rediscovering our own identity as Americans, and what it means to be an American, and what it means to, frankly, to be a human being on the planet Earth. Our sisters and brothers in the LGBTQ plus community, dare I say, really, walking their own stations of the cross right now, and we, our institutions, laying down a lot of that passion of those crosses that they're bearing. Any thoughts on that? I know you
very many thoughts on that. Number one, that's a struggle that I have to face even within the church.
Yes,
because we have in Catholicism historically such an emphasis on the sacredness of sexuality, right, but only understood in a binary way. Whereas psychology and the social sciences and so many other areas of science have helped us understand there's a broader spectrum than anybody realized.
Yes.
The church is very slow to catch up to those things. And even if we don't understand it philosophically or scientifically or in any other ways, we still have to support the dignity of every person, whether we believe what they believe or think like they think. How do you deny somebody's existence? It pains me when teachings from my church tend to claim that the non-binary person, the transsexual person, transgender person doesn't exist. That's difficult. You're denying people's own experience. But, it's also a question of when we talk about the nation, well, I think every poll says people are more and more tolerant of things, but those in power are not.
Yes.
So we have this, the splitting of the ways where so many institutions, think about when, the military first admitted gays. It was a very hard thing to accept, but it went smoothly. Sure, there were some dust-ups, whatnot, but overall, it was widely accepted by the time.
Absolutely. My growing up years in the military were that 15-year, 20-year period of policy change. That policy change happened person-to-person interaction,
yes,
a unified purpose by mission, and one-on-one conversations with individuals, understanding our common humanness.
Yes.
Right? Not only as humans, but also as Americans.
So to try to take it backwards is really going against,
absolutely,
against the grain of the nation, popularly speaking.
Yes.
And, I think it's one of the signs of the times that we're facing now. Who's making the decisions? And all the more reason we have to have all the voices at the table.
Yes. In a moment, to your point, and we are now in a moment where, I'll just state it bluntly. Our current administration has already shifted to the binaries.
Yes.
I hate the word. I hate the fact that we use this word. It's deceptive. we're in a moment of we're in a restorative moment, which is actually going back. That's where making America great, and then the caveat again.
Yeah, and great for whom? Great for whom?
And great for whom? Exactly.
It's a regressive.
It's a regressive.
Process.
That's a better word. You know, we ourselves as policy framers today share a it's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy to our original founders and framers in terms of what we call things and the confusion that we lay out right at the beginning of our defining of terms. I'm going to use this as a transition to get into our, more deeply into our part one. I want to talk about this. Here's an example. The establishment clause, right? Which if our founders and framers were more accurate, they would have called it what it actually is. Non-establishment, right? It's all about non-establishment. And we get, and that's the beginning of a say-do gap in a business lag of institutions being behind the changing times of societies when we get the framing and the definition of things wrong from step zero. The establishment clause, let me just preamble into this for our listeners, a little bit of Civics Brief 101. Before we can talk about force and faith, particularly at street level, and before we talk about humanitarian duty colliding with political power, we have to return to, again, these first principles. So the Constitution, our U.S. Constitution, did something radical, right? It protected religious freedom without making religion an instrument of the state. That's non-establishment, however we label it formally in our Constitution as the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause is all about emphasizing non-state establishment. It's a protective against a state capture of religion and church. It's all about free exercise. It's supposed to be all about free exercise. It's supposed to be about finding an equipoise or an imbalance between, again, that city of man and city of God. It's about a balanced, equipoised tension between the two as well. And all that is by intention. Because I would say our founders knew something that perhaps we've forgotten, that faith thrives when it's free. When it is free, it thrives, but it can also die when it's weaponized. And I think today, to say the least, there's a lot of weaponization of faith for state purposes and a narrow casting of, in a wicked way, of painting it as a restorative, a positive aims-based restoration, which is nothing other than regression. Any thoughts on that? I've got a couple of questions in the establishment realm.
Yeah, lots of thoughts. I mean, we often talk about our founders as being Christian, but I think being Enlightenment philosophers, or at least products of the Enlightenment, was far more important. They were deists than their Christianity. Yes. And so we're coming about, our revolution is shortly before the French Revolution, but we were not fighting an established church or an order of society that was founded by Christendom. And many of the people that support the regressive forces today are under the illusion, whether it's chosen or not, that this is a Christian found nation. Well, yes, many of the founders were baptized and had membership in Christian churches. They were not even thinking about the kind of pluralism that, they had a handful of Jewish people around, barely any Muslim people around, but not thinking about a pluralistic society that extended beyond Christians.
Right.
But in Europe, we had the strong tradition of established churches where tax money was paid to the government and also shared with the churches. Yes. And so this experiment was not looked kindly upon by Rome from the Catholic perspective. And it was only at the Second Vatican Council, which began in the 1960s, that there was a formal endorsement, thanks to an American Jesuit who really forcefully argued this, which opened up the possibility of religious liberty and everything else as a positive good for society. So it is that Enlightenment idea that one is more faithful to a tradition that one has chosen and belongs to freely, not by coercion, and that the churches can flourish without state interference.
Yes.
But interference should neither be involvement in promoting a religion, which always comes with strings, nor should it be the interference of blocking the free exercise of religion until it affects the common good.
So well said. You drive me right to, the heart of the matter. I mean, a rise, I would say, and the empirics prove it out, a rise of affinities towards Christian nationalism here in our country today. And I would say a very particular form of Christian nationalism I don't think a lot of people are familiar with. Christian nationalism in a very dominionist form, and in its intersections internationally with the identist movement. So we're seeing this playing out a lot across Western and Eastern Europe, really coming from the East into the West. And to some degree triggered over the last 10, 15 years, oxygen added to the fire by forced migration of the wars to the south of Europe coming out of the greater Middle East and the Levant. And the impoverishment of national state public administration systems to be able to effectively absorb weaponized mass migrations of people groups into the southern cone of the European Union, and interestingly enough, from a defense security standpoint, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's southern flank as well. Mm-hmm. But all that giving a coincidence and a compounding metastasis, a contagion of a rise of Christian dominionist form nationalism. Any thoughts on that and the challenges that maybe you're seeing as well?
Well, first of all, Christian nationalism has to be seen as an oxymoron. You cannot be a Christian and a nationalist. They're incompatible terms, and yet,
yes.
But it's a strong movement, and there are, as you noted, some variations on that strong movement. It's so connected to racism, and it so has to do with the protection of power held by people who are used to being a majority and are fearful of becoming a minority.
Yes.
And I think that's the global response in the West, at least.
Any thoughts on the interplay of this? You've explained that incredibly elegantly. Any thoughts on the additional interplay, just to complicate it a little bit further, of rising concerns over demographic changes, particularly in Europe and here in the United States, and what has given rise to this, to be kind, I'll call it a pseudo theory. To be accurate, I'll call it a conspiracy theory of great replacement and a great replacement, quote unquote, theory. Thoughts on that, Bishop?
It's a dominant way of thinking among those who would opt for Christian nationalism or dominionism, and it's completely incompatible with the Christian faith that was given to us by Jesus Christ. Right. So the contrast has to be pointed out, and the churches have a responsibility to do that when they're lining up with Christian nationalists, as some of them are. I don't understand it at all, except that there's another agenda going on. There's something else that they are honoring or worshiping, really. So what happens in these places, first of all, we have a hard time looking at the bigger picture. I think we're in a time of such specialization in so many areas, it's really hard to see a bigger picture. And why are people moving from their homelands elsewhere? Well, because of economic imbalance, now more and more because of wars and because of climate change.
Exactly.
And Pope Francis was one of the few people willing to talk about that the huge interrelationship of these things, and even raise the question that nobody seems to want to talk about, is whether the age of the nation state has already passed.
Oh, here we go. Yes.
Are we looking at, we're looking at post-World War II maps defining the nation states. And people have moved and migrated. And of course, we have transnational corporations that pay no attention to those boundaries in terms of how they market and where they're involved. But we still have nothing that transcends the nation state in an effective way. We have some cooperation for global law until somebody doesn't like it and then says it doesn't apply to us, usually our own country, because we're so powerful.
Well, I was going to say, increasingly, that pushback state being the United States of America, which gave birth and was custodian by our own election coming out of World War II in 1945, the custodian of a rules-based and values-informed international order, we now being the leading entity pushing against that very rule set.
Sure.
That very rule set. We're becoming more of an anathema to self in this regard. You've really hit on, Bishop John, you've really hit on one of the reasons why the Civic Brief is constructed the way it is. It's endeavors to deal with those issues at the nexus and the intersectionality of the so-called domestic realm in the geopolitical and the international realm. We are, I believe, and the empirics show it, bear it out, we are at a moment of what's called epochal change, systems level change, where just like a wounded animal where its ecosystem is changed to such, or its predator-prey balance has gone so much into an imbalance where that species becomes hyper-defensive and hyper-violent because its moment in time, it's refusing to change and adapt to its ecosystem. It's unable to and unwilling to. And those tend to be very violent moments in biological affairs. They also are very violent times in state ecological terms. And I do believe we're in a moment where the nation state, the confines of the nation state, are no longer robust enough and agile and adaptive enough to deal with a transnational sense of community, a global civic society that transcends those boundaries now. And what happens, typically the human thing is when you're in a corner, you tend to lash out, you tend to use more lethal forms of all types of force in a hyper, even ridiculous sense of being preyed upon. And I mean, what I've just described and what you described, frankly, better than I did, seems to be the tack line and tenor of the United States of America these days. We tend to be hyper fearful of things. I would also say that it feels like we're less of a nation state even here in these times, and more of what I might call a market state, and others have called a market state. And now we're right back to what is serving whom and who is serving what, right?
Pope Francis even used the terminology you used. He talked about this is not an epoch of change, but the change of an epoch. And it's so much bigger than any of us recognize. And he reflected even on COVID-19. And he said, when this virus brings the whole world to a halt,
exactly,
you would think it would be a stimulus for recognizing that we have to face this together if we're going to face it. But instead, it led to greater divisions, some of which are still with us.
Absolutely.
And so Pope Francis also said, if that's the case, what are we going to do when the climate catastrophe hits us in a major way? We have to learn from what has happened to us.
And the learning seems like in the business world there seems to be a business lag to our learning. And that is not a good thing. What, in that sense, is there hope, and what is the obligation of pastoral engagement at the most local level in politics amid this moment? Some thoughts on that.
We used to have the old saying, that all politics is local. It was Tip O'Neill, right?
Yes.
All politics is local. I think our version of that in the church is it's all relational. And in his encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, that's what Pope Francis talked about. He talked about the friendship of politics. He talked about the noble profession of politics when it works for the common good, and even political love. That, as being valid concepts today, which we don't hear much about, rather than expediency, rather than the short term, how do I get to the next election, and not pay attention to the bigger picture of everything that's happening all around. So on the pastoral level, I think it's about when you're building relationships and networks of relationships, at some point you start to see where is power. And is this group of people, is this community and its relationships included or excluded from the power structure.
And increasingly the state, there's a rigor mortis going on. Increasingly it's the same dispossessed. It's one thing to deal with an acute dispossession, right? You can still be party to, as that foundational and framers admonition embedded in the spirit, if not the express words of our Declaration of Independence, our founding documents, the Federalist, Anti-Federalist papers, and the Constitution itself, of majority rule, but respect and voice for minority rights.
Exactly. Yes.
But once a community of marginalized become perpetually marginalized structurally, structurally, those have-nots, there's a different logic trail that develops, and those have-nots become increasingly want-nots. And, I spent 25, 30 years in the military dealing with those moments of dark transformation and transition in all the overseas places. One of the things that inspired me to start the Substack writing campaign that companions the Civic Brief, the podcast, Compound Security Unlocked, and inspires this podcast, the Civic Brief, is coming home, if you will, from all those overseas endeavors to bring force and non-force in a balanced way towards countering the conditions of insurgency, violent insurgency. I come home and, it smells like, it looks like, it feels like some of those similar, if not same, preconditions right here in the streets of America that give rise to all these places that we're easily and quick to say, well, that's a global South. Of course, those kinds of things are going to happen in the global South or the old language, third or fourth world. But it's happening right here in the United States. I mean, all the more difficult to get to that relational, pastoralship, because we're all gated. We're all gated up, right? I speak to you from a gated community here. We're all gated and separated. Pick and choose your social media platform and your source of the news. No longer all the all the best that's worth the print, or whatever that old New York Times admonition was. We are separate and divided structurally and increasingly by policy today. With that, I'm going to use that as kind of a transition into the next conversation. We're already in it. I really want to talk a bit about some of the current challenges: force, faith, and civic responsibility. We don't have, Bishop. We don't have to look any further than the federalization of National Guard forces, a trend line, frankly, towards the fabrication. I'm just going to call it what I think it is: the fabrication of a national emergency in city centers. Those city centers happen to be more blue, maybe purple, in a partisan political sense of the terms, but it begins in Washington, D.C., and you see, I'm going to use the term value-laden as it is, metastasis across the country. Chicago, we're seeing pastors in the middle of this nexus between the state and society. I have a picture, an image of the young pastor being pelted by pepper gun by federal agents, ICE agents, from a rooftop in Chicago, Illinois. I'm also reminded of the night letters. I mean, I'm using that very deliberately to kind of trigger my military brethren. We know what night letters were in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, but our own federal government going in the night and dragnetting whole families from apartment buildings, fishing with dynamite, if you will, and then taking what seems to be less and less effort to distinguish between violent criminals, bona fide violent criminals, and regular family members, women, including women and children, citizen and non-citizen alike, migrant and undocumented, and documented, undocumented alike. We're seeing this all over the place. The courts, always a lag. Immoral and unethical and perhaps illegal actions by the state being conducted by executive writ and executive order. And then once the action taken, days, weeks, if not months, or perhaps even years before it goes through our constitutional juridical process, the business lag of it, that at the end of the day may say, as the judges have said for the federalization of these forces across the board, illegal. But that comes a day late and a dollar short. The immoral, unethical, and illegal action already having been done, the damage already being done. Very little we can do there in terms of legal sense. It's based on the express powers, but we're seeing weaknesses in that establishment of the state's powers. It's these places where I look for and think the pastoral power. The power of faith and church may come to bear to actually build effective bridges between protective shields in these kinds of say-do gap moments. Hopefully that's enough. I was a bit all over the place on that, but I think you've got a picture of the moment that I'm trying to paint.
Yeah, first of all, I'm glad you used the word fabrication for talking about the crisis and emergency that comes up, because it does lead to the question of whether any of this action is legal. Right? And so the whole dispute right now between Democrats and Republicans about language, about disobeying illegal orders, that whole thing has come up. And I think that's going to be a question for the churches as well, because we certainly do not recognize an unjust law as something that's binding. Now, we can debate about who decides whether it's a just or unjust law, but in those spaces that you're talking about, so first of all, like you said, that the justice system lags. So any kind of court decisions may be helpful for the future, but it doesn't do anything for somebody who's stuck in El Salvador. That's right. A Venezuelan stuck in El Salvador being tortured.
The lag can become very immoral and unjust.
It is. Right. Has already become that in so many cases. And the pastoral presence, the church's presence, and I don't just mean the Catholic Church's presence, but the church's presence is not welcome or wanted in any of those places.
Yes.
The pastor that was shot by the pepper bullets was Presbyterian, I believe, part of a coalition, a multi-denominational coalition demonstrating out in Broadview outside of Chicago. But we had the situation in Miami where the church was not allowed to come in. Eventually, they were able to go in there and offer the sacraments to those who were incarcerated there, and even the question of whether they could be incarcerated. So you have them playing games about this is a processing. It's not a holding facility. Right. Even though they've been here for several days and we're not feeding them or providing adequate. It's a processing place. It's not a detention.
Play with language.
Where you don't have right to be accessed. They have something to hide. They have something to be afraid of. And they are afraid of the church being involved, or the churches being involved and seeing with their own eyes. They're also prohibiting members of Congress from entering these facilities.
Yes.
The illegality, I think, is so blatant.
Yes.
That it's almost a mockery of the legal system, because they know the legal system can never catch up. And
why is there so much fear in not calling the blatancy that it is? Where do you think that comes from? And what role might there be in that for community level, for lack of a better way of putting it, pastoralism, the roles of the church?
That's precisely something that I struggle with. I think most Americans, whether or not they would consider themselves patriotic, really want to believe their government does the right thing and is a force for good in the world. And it has to be proven otherwise to us. My own theory is that so much, we have allowed so much that the Trump administration has done to be normalized. And I think the press is complicit in this. Religious leaders are complicit in this. Members of Congress themselves are complicit in this, because from the beginning, nobody just called out and said, this is illegal. This is not permitted. This is because they know there's a lag in the justice system. But
Right.
you can say that this is not a fact. We're at a point where we don't even agree on facts. It's very hard to have a real debate. So what passes as debate is people shouting at each other and past each other.
Yes.
Look at the language, even in the midst of these demonstrations that are going on outside of ICE facilities. Everybody's using the F word against everybody else. That's not dialogue. That's not discourse. That's not productive. That's not
Correct.
leading to anything productive. And that's demeaning dignity on every side. But if we can't have a civil debate, if we can't agree with what basic facts are, if we believe there's truths and then alternative truths, I mean, I'm not sure how democracy functions that way, and maybe that's the point. Because
That's what you saw, the look on my face. I was puzzling over something that you probably recognize it in my body language. You hit it. That, Bishop, that is the one of the haunts that keeps me up at night and robs me of sleep. Perhaps this is the policy aim. Perhaps this is the goal.
Well, and it's not too far-fetched when you read Project 2025,
Correct.
and then watch what's unfolding.
That's correct.
In
That's
front of
correct.
us.
I mean, I'll go further and say that, I say this a lot, actually, quippishly at first, but it's becoming more sobering and true as we go along. This administration, particularly our current president, Donald Trump, the one thing you can count on him being perfectly honest about is his dishonesty.
It's all blatant now.
He's told us every extra constitutional or unconstitutional act that he is about to make. It's not been hidden.
No, it's flaunted.
It's flaunted. It's flaunted in the flaunting, it becomes the word that you so rightly use, normalized. It becomes normalized.
So we have a press, even the so-called left-leaning press,
Right.
talks about Trump's statements as if they were a matter of fact.
Correct.
They take
Correct.
the word of a Christy Nome who wouldn't recognize the truth if it were handed to her, but
Absolutely.
they take her word as a valid perspective on what's going on rather than as demonstrably false.
Yes. In abusing the general public's that latent faith still in the trustworthiness or the fidelity of the institutions, to
Yes.
include the fourth estate, the media, an abuse of that to dismantle it, to
That's right.
dismantle all of it, right? So it's even it's an abuse of our under-awareness in our under-informed faith and trustworthiness that we're still trying to convince ourselves as patriots, as real patriots, to continue to vest in our governing institutions, to include the fourth estate, the media. It's in an incredible abuse of power. And the power is we the people's. The power is ours in a democratic republic, right? And I say
It
both
should
because
be.
we are both. It should be. We
right?
now live in the should world.
And part of your the outline that you provided me talks about the nature of partisan politics.
Yes.
I'm a little afraid of presenting this false equivocation because when the majority party has both an aberrant president and then both houses of Congress that refuse to hold him accountable,
Correct.
the system simply does not work.
Correct. Where does that leave us, Bishop? And what is
this
the
is
role
right where
of
we are.
And what is it? What is the role? What is the role, therefore, of the church and of individuals in the church, like you, and the laity? What must we do? What must be done by those? That pastoral obligation and duty.
Well, the church as an institution has to do a better job of teaching how to critically read and understand what's going on.
Yeah.
We live in a soundbite age, and we prefer to get our news from TikTok and from 30-second videos than to do any kind of in-depth understanding of something. So that's a huge disadvantage already, just the whole realm of social media. And then it's not only that every person has a valid opinion, but we don't know what's produced by artificial intelligence, what's coming from nations with their own agenda. We know about the Soviet infiltration, other countries that whatever the Chinese role is that gets into our media. We don't even know the sources of our way of thinking, where it's coming from. Who forms our minds, who forms our values. When it's this shallow and when it can be influenced by even unknown sources, it's very hard to work for the complex system that participatory democracy is supposed to be.
Yeah. So you see a particular role of the city of God, if you will, to come more into interplay there because of problems within the city of man, the institutionalized city of man?
Yes, but if the city of God is affirming Christian nationalism, as some dimensions of it are, then what value does it have? Faith, faith and organized religion are not, in the position that they were even 2 decades ago in terms of the amount of influence. Sometimes people will give higher marks of trust to individual members of the clergy, but as an institution, the church is like the government in terms of whether people will put their trust in it as an institution.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that as you did. Such truth, so well said, because you're right. You do the polls of Americans and their affinity for their individual congressperson still high.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But for Congress as institution, disastrously low. And you're saying that we're starting to see the same thing in terms of the institutionalized church.
Sure. In our denomination, people know their pastor better than they know the bishop. So the pastor's a good guy. The bishop, I don't know about that. Right? And 2 or 3 bishops or more, that's not a good thing.
You had said something earlier, and now what you said just now brings back an opportunity for me to ask this question. And I'm gonna move us. I want a couple of questions on the international realm, and then we're gonna leave it with a piece about the future and AI. But first, particularly with Christian, this rise of Christian nationalism, I hear less and less. I'm going to say this: the last 10, 20 years, I hear less and less mentioned in so-called Christian communities of Jesus. Or when I do hear Jesus mentioned, I'm hearing Jesus mentioned as a warrior, right? And I think somewhere I read something you had written about, let me see if I can grab it here. The nonviolent Jesus hasn't been preached enough in our own churches. I think you said something to that vein.
Gandhi recognized that. He said, Gandhi said, I follow the teachings of Jesus. I just can't follow Christians.
Right. This is the thing. What would Jesus do? How would Jesus walk? Where would he walk, and with whom today? Any thoughts on that? And kind of tied to that, I also don't hear any justifications when I get into debates and, frankly, arguments with these individuals. They hearken not to the New Testament. They hearken all the way back to the Old Testament in their favorite books, one being Leviticus, typically, and gross interpretations of those Old Testament books as well. So I don't hear a lot about the full Jesus, right? And I don't hear a lot of, coming from the gospel.
That's right.
Frankly. Let me pause there and see if you have any additional thoughts to texture that with.
Yes, I do. The use of Old Testament, you can find anything you want to find in the Old Testament. I remember some of my professors talking about, you can use the Bible to prove there's no God, right?
Right.
The Bible itself says there is no God. It's in the book of Psalms. The line before it says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. But,
Exactly.
But this is the method of taking lines out to make it say what you want it to say.
Oh, yes.
But it was a standing principle for all of Christianity, as far as I understood, that the New Testament is normative, and we read the Old Testament as Christians through the lens of the New Testament.
Yes.
Fortunately, since the Second Vatican Council, we've come to a new appreciation for the Hebrew Scriptures read as Hebrew Scriptures, read for their place and their time, not just pointing to Jesus, but having a particular meaning for that community. Both of those things can be held, but not taking, if you're going to use prohibitions from the book of Leviticus, then you better not be eating bacon and shrimp.
Exactly.
And as one of my colleagues said one
I
time
love
at a
both.
city council meeting, when they were arguing that, the death penalty was biblical, and a priest got up and said, yes, but it was also prescribed for adultery. So how many want to be on the stand?
There you go. Yeah, pick up the rock. Who wants to pick up the first rock and throw it?
Exactly.
Right?
You can't just pick and choose among these things. Very recently, at an assembly of the priests of our diocese, I was asked by somebody, what do you think is the most urgent need for the church right now? And I said, to preach the full gospel.
Oh, beautiful.
To preach the gospel, as Francis of Assisi said, without commentary.
Oh. And you say that last caveat brings me right back to our concerns over our media.
Yes.
Right? It's one thing to report, it's another thing to journalize.
Yes. Yes.
And particularly in a partisan, politicized environment, and one that is held and owned, arguably subsidiary to moneyed interests.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting. I want to ask you a question. We're going to jump to the international a bit. A lot of real challenges going on globally, in terms of violence towards members of Christian communities. Mm-hmm. But equally, if not more, fabrication, I'm going to use the word again, fabrication of an overabundance of violent actions by states being taken. I'm thinking of Nigeria in particularly, but Nigeria only being the latest exemplar with our current administration here, the second administration of Donald Trump, Trump's United States, right, and our foreign policy therein. Nigeria being on the target line, figuratively and literally, in this fabrication of Nigerian state-sanctioned attacks predominantly against Christians, when the facts just don't bear out. Nigeria has a violence problem, but Muslims are actually dying at higher rates, frankly, because there's more of them there than Christians are. But there is truth at the bottom of the fabrication, and then that becomes a dinner table kind of set up for manipulation and abuse from a policy standpoint. Any thoughts on how to find how to preach against that while also ministering to the real problem that lies at the kernel, at the seed corn level of this issue? Because I see this only getting worse and worse in terms of false wag the dog type fabricated justifications for increased use of military lethal force abroad. I'll say one more thing. I don't think also it's a surprise that it's Nigeria because of the raw earths and the oil interests that are there, as well as,
and where else? Venezuela,
as well as Venezuela, right? And also I'll add the black and brown places, right? So I'll pause there, let you grapple with that a little bit.
Well,
Bishop.
I'd say first and foremost, anything that's coming from the Trump administration can't be believed at face value.
Yes.
And
Thanks
then
for saying it.
We add to that, we in the United States are so U.S.-centric in our news consumption, in our reading. For those who even pay any attention to news, watch a U.S.-based newscast, even on the networks, the broadcast networks or on cable networks. It's all U.S. You have to go to BBC or somewhere else to get any kind of an international perspective. And even that comes with its own bias. But so we are dependent upon those sources to interpret what's going on in cultures and places that we don't understand. So you use the example of Nigeria and then add to that, we want to justify our own victimizing others by seeing ourselves as victims.
Right.
Look at all the poor persecuted white South Africans that have to be, have their numbers increased to enter legally into the United States, whereas nobody else does because they're victimized. right?
Exactly.
So is there persecution against Christians? There is definitely persecution against Christians. But is the Trump administration saying anything about where that happens in a state-sponsored way in India?
Right.
Because
we have strategic interests, to put it that way, with Modi's India.
Exactly. So
Correct.
we always have to look for what values are being articulated, and never take stuff at face value.
So well said. So well said. I apologize. I said one more question. I got to ask you two. One real quick one on, I'd be remiss. We'd both be remiss if we didn't talk a bit about Israel-Palestine in Gaza. Maybe just one broad question, maybe not even a question itself, but just give you an opportunity to talk about, what might a genuine peace building role for U.S. faith communities look like? Even amid a so-called 20-point plan. I know it's a big question, but just some other handholds to give us, other than the only ones that are being put forward to us by a Netanyahu state of Israel and a Trump United States of America.
Yeah, this is where our ignorance of history really becomes problematic.
Yeah.
Right. And then it pairs so nicely with the fundamentalism, the Christian fundamentalism, that sees Israel as part of God's ultimate plan. So we have to do everything for the state of Israel, not the biblical Israel, but the state of Israel.
Right.
Right. So, and then even among those who may not buy into those kind of things, there's still the guilt from the Second World War and the Holocaust that leaves us rightfully with a soft spot for an Israeli homeland, right? But there's such a bias that we don't necessarily see the generations of oppression and the continued hatred that is fomented among children in those nations, one group against another.
Correct.
So that there's nothing to build peace on. But the last thing you need is for an American president to say, we're going to send everybody from Gaza outside of the country. We're going to relocate them and repatriate them somewhere else and develop a resort in Gaza.
Right. I cannot imagine that it's just coincidental that Pope Leo has made his first international visitations to the Greater Levant, Turkey specifically, Lebanon. I can't imagine that there are not conversations as part of that visit, that state visit and ecumenical visit, speaking to this, how to find and create, frankly, how to create this equipoise, an effective equipoise between what I'll call so-called, Jewish trauma and Palestinian suffering, and how to do it simultaneously, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it would be easy, but I think it can be done. I think there are organizations within the territory of the state of Israel that are doing it.
Yeah.
Pax Christi International can point to groups that are creating dialogue on the ground, groups of mothers who Palestinians and Israelis who've lost children because of the war can get together and advocate for terms of peace that are respectful of everybody. But I don't know how the U.S. can be a broker of peace when we are so one-sided in our approach. Now the other side of that is could be frustrated with Pope Francis and with Pope Leo for not being more blunt about who's to blame in certain situations. But if they want to maintain the possibility of neutrality in order to be able to negotiate some kind of peace, they have to be very circumspect about those things. Same thing with Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
The popes have condemned specific things that are, atrocious, but not pin the entire blame on one side or the other, because you can't if you're trying to be a force for peace.
This is such an important point to make, because as I run through in my own mind, the list of statehoods involved, of course, including the United States of America, It's hard to find a genuine unbiased third party interlocutor. My sense is that you have the similar, if not same sense, that it's probably the faith communities that are going to have to do this work.
But the faith communities don't understand each other, are not on the same page. This is
we come back to the individual pastoral.
This is a real challenge
mission
right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I think you used the word co-opted at some point,
Yes. Yes, I did.
Our church is co-opted by one message or the other.
Wow. So maybe I'm now drawn to put I'll use the word deliberately, my faith in the public service of denominational, trans-institutional pastoralism.
I think that's where we want to go. I think that was, for Catholics, I think that was part of the original vision of the Second Vatican Council that's never been realized, but that denominations become less important and the Christian message and the gospel become foremost.
Yeah.
But if we have people claiming to be
true universalism, then.
Yeah, yes. A Christian universalism, I guess.
Yeah. Yes.
I guess you would say.
Yeah.
I think it would not be an easy road, but I think it's really the road forward. I think it's what we have to embark on.
Well, the crises may drive the construction.
Right.
Of it, and the small c constitution of it, right?
Right.
It may be the crises themselves. And frankly, the states showing themselves increasingly unwilling, unable and unwilling and unwitting to the challenges that transcend these old institutionalized ways.
Right.
Right. Interesting. Please.
It wasn't that long ago that it seemed the whole world was against Russia and on the side of Ukraine. Why can the whole world not contain Russia? Because there's still too many economic interests that undermine sanctions in any other way of trying to coerce. But I don't think we can get to the point to say that an aggressor deserves rights, in this negotiations. And when our nation seems to be negotiating with the aggressor, but not with the invaded Ukraine.
Well, I'm so glad you laid this out, because you remind me as a former military man, and truly a soldier for life in many respects. This lies at the cornerstone of Augustine's just war theory, and the idea of, if we are now on the side of the aggressor, the great sin of international relations and international affairs since the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648. And our custodianship over it since 1945, formally so. We are on the path of the unjustness of the use of force for power and political purposes. We're on the wrong side of jus in bello, jus ad bellum, and jus post bellum.
Mm-hmm. And do you not think it would have been different before Trump?
Not think it would have been?
I think it's part of this normalization that we're not questioning enough the aggression of Russia, because of Trump has normalized this idea that they can be good. Yes.
Wow. Cornerstone problem. Bishop, you've been incredibly gracious with your time. I'm gonna give you one more question. I want to in this part 4, foresighting the future. I want to get your thoughts on artificial intelligence, humankind, and the next civic horizon. I'm just gonna throw a couple of questions out at you, and then you do with them what you will, if anything. Couple of questions here. What must remain human in an age of machine-generated meaning and algorithmic authority? How should churches ethically leverage artificial intelligence, if at all, while protecting the integrity of spiritual formation? I'm just going to lay out a couple of more just for the travelers out there. Does artificial intelligence threaten human centrality, or does it reveal something deeper, perhaps, about humility and humanity and our place in creation? And what role should faith play in shaping America's future response to technological displacement? Something with all of that. It's
Sure. I was very pleased to see the Vatican during Pope Francis's time was very engaged in the questions of artificial intelligence, because I think they saw on the horizon that this is going to challenge our understanding of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing comparable that has never yet developed was, concerns about whether there's intelligent life outside of the earth, right?
Right.
So how would that change our understanding of what it means to be human, made in the image and likeness of God?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I write about that a lot. It's a question that puzzles me quite a bit. So thanks for bringing
Yeah, and
that
I don't
up.
think we have an answer for it. And I think this is what the Vatican was doing, is exploring before to at least lay out what the questions are going to be, and to talk about how to be use this tool of artificial intelligence responsibly and intelligently until we understand what the risks and the dangers are. Part of which is it could easily build on the dehumanization that is already underway in our culture. If we have outsourced the ability to think for ourselves to talking heads, if we've outsourced our who forms the values of a society, it seems to be social media at the moment rather than any overarching civilization or church or tradition or whatever. So, those things are kind of preparing the way for artificial intelligence to be dominant over human intelligence. Mm-hmm. Now, it wasn't too long ago, I was at a workshop that was designed for bishops. It was a presenter from Fordham University who's written quite a bit about artificial intelligence. And his main point to us was, don't fear it.
Okay.
Learn how, because it's not going away.
Right.
So learn how to engage it. And then model how it can be used morally or, ethically, by allowing artificial intelligence to do the heavy lifting, but not the creative thinking.
I'm very interested in that last part, right? What makes me more hopeful of the technology is, again, keeping the human in the lead, and the ability for the artificial intelligence to do those artificial things, those mundane things, those mundane tasks, so that it lightens our load as the human agent to allow us to achieve those higher levels of human agency, that creative realm.
What a human team of researchers would take months to do, you can have in a matter of minutes through AI.
Yes.
Right? So allow AI to draw from the wealth of human experience that's already written and recorded.
Right.
Not create it, but draw from it and provide us the materials to think about it in new ways with a broader scope. That's very good. The other thing this professor suggested was to always cite sources, because artificial intelligence draws from everything that's out there, and we know that everything out there is not valid, good, true, or beautiful.
Right? And I'm going to give it more human agency than I should right now, but it lies. It tells falsehoods in an attempt to appease.
Yes, I think they've demonstrated
it's human
that.
agent.
Yeah.
And it's doing the very thing that we as human beings do as well.
Yeah. I think
but it's doing it at breakneck speed.
I think we've seen that.
Yeah.
But if there's there's a transparency of showing sources, demonstrate, and then for the churches to be honest about where it's been used, just like media is supposed to be, the more responsible papers of record saying the story was partially generated by AI or whatever.
Exactly.
That seems to be a way to go for now, while we're still learning. This is still a new realm.
I haven't done a whole lot of research on this, but I now will, now that I've stated it openly. I'm very interested in the period of time of the printing press and the Gutenberg Bible, and I can't imagine that was not as an extremely tectonic. We know it was a very tectonic moment in terms of technological revolutions and technological affairs, again, outpacing society's evolutions, right?
It's not an overstatement to say that the printing press made the Protestant Reformation possible.
There it is. So do
You
you
could put
foresee
Bibles in people's hands and they could read for themselves.
Yes. Do you see a most similar but not same kind of case comparison to where we are with those potentialities with AI and artificial generative?
Haven't thought about that enough yet to have.
Okay, so then we will. I mean, I would love to capture a future episode of the Civic Brief. Maybe we could, talk about this.
That sounds interesting.
Bishop, thanks so much for your time. You've been more than gracious.
You're most
giving
welcome.
me the extra time of looking.
This is
forward
important stuff to talk about, and I don't have enough venues. I try to take advantage of every one I'm given, but I don't have enough venues to talk about these.
Well,
things.
you have a venue here often, regularly, if you'd like so, with the Civic Brief. And I look forward to our next conversation. Thanks so much, Bishop. And
thank you.
Happy holidays to you
and to
your
you.
community.
And to you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.